Alright, so things just keep getting worse for Lil Durk. Right now, he's locked up on federal charges after the feds unsealed an indictment accusing him of being involved in a murder-for-hire plot that led to the death of Lil Pab in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. He's officially been arrested and charged in that case, and we've been covering it here on the channel since it happened late last year. But that's not the only legal issue Durk is facing. There's actually another murder-for-hire case that he's been linked to. He hasn't been charged in this second case, at least not yet, but it's starting to look more and more likely that he could be. The government has already mentioned this second plot in some of their documents, but up until now, there haven't been many details. That changed yesterday when new paperwork dropped. In the documents, the government says they have evidence tying Durk to this second case. One of the suspects was secretly recorded by his cellmate while they were both locked up in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Turns out, that cellmate was working with the feds. On the recording, the suspect reportedly admits to killing a man named Stefan Mack, also known as Youngin, for a cash payout offered by a Chicago rapper tied to Durk's crew, Only the Family. In the documents, they refer to this rapper as Individual A. Stefan Mack was allegedly killed as revenge for the murder of Lil Durk's brother D Thang, who was shot in the head outside of Club O in Harvey, Illinois. No one has ever been arrested or charged for D Thang's murder, and the case is still open. Police did say D Thang may have had ties to the gangster disciples, but they never found the person responsible. Then, almost a year later, in January 2022, Stefan Mack was shot multiple times as he was leaving the Youth Peace Center of Roseland, an anti-violence community center. Two gunmen jumped out of a dark-colored Chrysler 300 and opened fire. Mack was hit in the head and chest and later died at the hospital. By late 2023, the feds charged two suspects, Anthony Montgomery Wilson and Preston Powell, with Mack's murder. According to the indictment, they conspired with others to kill Mack for money. The government's case includes security footage from the youth center that shows one of the shooters running across the icy parking lot with a gun. They also have witness statements, cell phone data, and text messages to support their claims. The feds say they found even more evidence after arresting the suspects, specifically text messages that helped build their case. This is where Lil Durk's name comes into the picture. According to those texts, the suspects talked about getting money from Durk shortly after the murder happened. An FBI special agent named Thomas Callahan filed an affidavit in April 2023 that directly named Lil Durk. In that document, he said, and I quote, "Lil Durk was and still is offering money for people to kill those responsible for his brother's murder." The FBI claims they got this info from a trusted confidential informant, someone who used to be a gang member and has been working with the government for at least 5 years. That's one informant, but there's also another. The second informant was actually sitting in a prison cell with one of the suspects. That suspect didn't know he was talking to a government informant, and he ended up confessing details about the murder while being secretly recorded. This was all revealed in a new court filing we're about to look at. So here's the deal. One of the suspects, Preston Powell, filed paperwork asking for his trial to be separated from the other guy, Anthony Montgomery Wilson. Because of that jailhouse recording, Powell doesn't want to be linked to Wilson's statements, especially since he wasn't the one who said them. The government responded to that motion, and in their response, they gave up a lot of details. Here's what we found out. According to the government, on January 27, 2022, Wilson, also known as Ajan Powell, also known as Marley, allegedly killed Stefan Mack, aka Youngin, outside the Youth Peace Center of Roseland to collect money for a hit. In October 2023, they were charged with murder for hire under federal law plus a conspiracy charge for planning it together. Wilson was also charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm. After Mack's murder, but before charges were filed, Wilson was serving time in state prison. While there, he talked about the killing with his cellmate, who was secretly working with the government. That informant recorded their conversations. During those talks, Wilson explained how he and Powell carried out the hit to collect payment from a Chicago rapper referred to in court as Individual A, and that's who many people believe is Lil Durk. Powell now wants to be tried separately from Wilson because he says that using Wilson's recorded confession against him would violate his constitutional rights, specifically the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees your right to a fair trial, legal counsel, and the ability to challenge witnesses who accuse you. Basically, Powell is arguing that his rights are being violated. He's saying, I have the right to know who's accusing me, and I should be able to question them about it. That's what the Sixth Amendment guarantees under what's called the Confrontation Clause. But the government is pushing back on that argument. They say that the recorded conversation between Wilson and his cellmate doesn't break that rule, because it wasn't a formal statement made in court or meant to be. used as evidence at the time, it was just a private conversation. So technically, it's not testimonial. They also point to Federal Rule of Evidence, 804b-3. This rule allows certain statements to be used in court, even if the person who said them isn't there, as long as the statement goes against the speaker's own interests and there's enough other evidence to show it's trustworthy. In other words, since Wilson basically confessed to a crime when he didn't know he was being recorded, and that statement is backed up by other facts, the court can still use it. So the government's position is, this wasn't a courtroom testimony, Wilson didn't know he was being recorded. It's not our fault that his words linked him to a murder. We can use this at trial and it doesn't violate anyone's rights. Then the paperwork gets into the background of the case. Here's a quick rundown of what it says. The Youth Peace Center is located at 420 West 111th Street in Chicago. It's a nonprofit organization that mentors teens and teaches them how to avoid violence. At the time he was killed, Stefan McAlso, known as Young Gon, was attending the center and meeting regularly with a mentor. On top of that, Mac was on federal supervised release after being convicted for having a gun as a felon. Based on video from the center and witness interviews, Mac showed up a little after noon on January 27, 2022 to attend a class and meet with his mentor at about 2:22 p.m. Montgomery Wilson and Preston Powell pulled into the youth center's parking lot in a 2014 black Chrysler 300 with tinted windows, a car that had been reported stolen just a week earlier on January 20th. First, they parked on the east side of the lot facing the building. A few minutes later, around 2:25, they moved the car to the west side of the lot, still waiting. They sat there until about 2:59 p.m. when Mac walked out of the center and headed toward his own car. As Mac crossed the lot, he glanced at the Chrysler. Then both Wilson and Powell got out, Wilson from the driver's side and Powell from the front passenger side, and started shooting at Mac. There's a surveillance screenshot showing this moment. Mac took off running, trying to escape. Wilson chased him across the parking lot and kept firing. Eventually, Mac collapsed on the other side of some nearby train tracks. Montgomery Wilson ran over to Mac, stood over him, and executed him. The surveillance footage showing this exact moment is included as Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 2. They even have screenshots taken from that footage. After killing Mac, Montgomery Wilson ran south on foot. A nearby Ring camera captured him running toward 111th Street. As he passed the house around 3:01 p.m., he was caught on camera yelling, "Marley, come on!" That video is listed as Exhibit 3, so they not only have footage of him running, they also caught him calling out to his partner. Marley, more surveillance footage from a community center at 342 West 111th Street showed Wilson walking eastbound on 111th Street around 3:03 p.m. Another camera caught someone walking through the backyard of an abandoned house. Minutes later, that same person crossed the street to the south side of 111th and headed west. Later that day, police recovered the Ruger AR-556 rifle used in Mac's murder in the backyard of that same vacant house. There's also a screenshot showing both the youth center and the abandoned house where the gun was found. It was just down the street. As Wilson was chasing Mac, the Youth Peace Center's security guard stepped into the parking lot. That's when Powell shot the guard in the left leg. The guard managed to fall back inside the center, and Powell ran off heading west. There's also video of this moment listed as Exhibit 4 where you can see Powell running away after both Wilson and Powell fled. Police searched the abandoned Chrysler 300 they'd left behind. Inside the car, they found Wilson's cell phone. Yuffie left his phone at the scene of the murder. When investigators tested the phone for DNA through the CODIS system, they found that the DNA likely belonged to Wilson. That's confirmed in a report from the Illinois State Police Lab, which they've included as Exhibit 5. But that's not all. Police also found a coffee cup inside the Chrysler with Powell's fingerprints on it. That's Exhibit 6. So now you've got one guy's DNA and the other guy's fingerprints, both found inside the car used in the murder. Then there's the recorded jail conversation between Wilson and the confidential informant. In that convo, Wilson admitted that they killed Mac to collect a cash bounty placed on Mac's head by someone referred to as Individual A, who the feds say is tied to the music label. Only the family, also known as OTF Wilson, was later arrested on February 19, 2022 for driving a stolen car. When he got arrested, police seized his new phone, which had only been activated on February 2, just 6 days after Mac was murdered, and after Wilson left his old phone behind in the getaway car. On February 10, 2022, Montgomery Wilson had a text message exchange with Pal, whose number was saved under the name Marley 2, about collecting payment from Individual A, referred to as F. On February 17th, they exchanged the following messages. Pal, what's up with F? Montgomery, nothing. Pal, what you mean? They not paying. Montgomery, we waiting. He comes up here on the 17th. Pal. All right. It says on February 17th, 2022, which is the day F was supposed to be in Chicago. That day, individual A was in Chicago conducting a podcast interview, which was later posted on YouTube. Text messages and video recordings recovered from Montgomery Wilson's phone show that he was present for that interview. For example, in the early morning hours of February 18th, Wilson had the following exchange with phone numbers ending in 8942 and 1838. 8942. In a car, what you doing? Montgomery. At this interview, 8942. Shit, you got it. Montgomery. Not that type of interview. It's the little cars that rappers be doing. 8942. They interviewing individual A. Montgomery. Yeah. Then with the other number, 1838. What you doing? Montgomery. I'm at this little interview. 1838. For a job. Montgomery. No. The kind rappers be doing. 1838. What? Montgomery. Individual A had an interview. These messages are included as Exhibit 8. That same day, Pal texted Montgomery Wilson, "Stand on that while you with individual A in 'em." Montgomery Wilson did not. Shortly on February 18th. Pal texted again, "Did individual A give you that money?" Montgomery still didn't respond. The following day, Montgomery Wilson was arrested by the Illinois State Police. On March 2nd, 2022, a Facebook story was uploaded to Montgomery Wilson's Facebook account. The video showed him holding money while one of individual A's songs played in the background. Lyrics from the song were displayed over the money. That story is attached as Exhibit 9. Now, here's what happened while Montgomery was in jail. The documents state that Montgomery Wilson's recorded statements to a confidential source came while he was incarcerated. On January 6, 2023, Wilson was convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm and possession of a stolen motor vehicle in Cook County Circuit Court. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. While in IDOC custody, the FBI arranged for another inmate who was working as a confidential source to share a cell with Montgomery and record their conversations. During these recorded discussions, Montgomery confessed to killing Mac Woom. He called by his nickname Young to collect a bounty that had been put out for Mac's murder. An audio file was submitted as part of the evidence, with key timestamps noted: 2:20, 5:28, 6:44, 7:54, 19, 20, and 21, 22, In those recordings, Wilson explained that a member of the Risky Road street gang acted as an inside source. That person had located Mac and was in phone contact. With Pal referred to by his nickname Marley On, the day of the murder phone records confirmed that on the afternoon of the shooting, Pal was in contact with a suspected Risky Road gang member who was at the Youth Peace Center that day. While discussing the murder, Wilson told the confidential source that he was the one who shot Mac. Montgomery Wilson also talked about another victim who was shot 4 days earlier, using the same AR-556 rifle and the same black Chrysler 300. Here's a quote from him. "But Young had an older mother, so he was in a little program for the feds. Shorty, whole time he was going out, he don't really be talking to nobody, you know what I'm saying. But Shorty and them ended up knowing who he was and put their homie on point. They put Marley on point, so I just dropped Lil Fred. Off you feel." What I'm saying, I had just dropped Lil Fred off. Remind you, probably 4 days ago, this the same car that I used on the dude I was just telling you about at at Englewood on 63rd, right across from Murder's crib with.
The AR document then goes on to explain what happened in that previous shooting. On January 22nd, 2022, 2 individuals ambushed another individual A outside an urban prep academy campus located near South Princeton Avenue and West 63rd
Street. Just to clarify, the individual A mentioned here is not the same person as the individual A discussed earlier in the case about Stefan Mack. These are 2 different people from 2 separate dockets. This individual A survived the shooting, but was later killed in August 2022. Before the shooting, he had been watching a basketball game at Urban Prep Academy. As he left the game, he saw 2 shooters get out of a black Chrysler 300 that had been waiting for him in the parking lot. The Chicago Police Department's case supplementary report is included as Exhibit 10. It confirms that the shell casings recovered from the January 22nd shooting were fired from the same Ruger AR-556 that Montgomery Wilson used in the murder of Stefan Mack on January 27th. During the jail recordings, Montgomery Wilson explained that he picked up Pal before that earlier shooting. Their man called Marley got the inside source on whoever this individual A was. I called Marley, I said, "Man, where you at?" He said, "Man, I'm at the crib on 103rd on Mike, I'ma grab you." Even though I ain't never dished with him before, I don't hear of him getting wild. He ain't never got no unintelligible or nothing. They appear to be referring to murders when he says he done got some attempts, meaning attempted murders. Then he calls him a little flunky, but notes he doesn't really get wild. The document also lays out that cell site records. Back up Wilson's claims. Around 2 p.m. on the day of Mack's murder, Pal's and Wilson's phones connected to the same cell towers in the vicinity of Pal's residence. Between 2:15 and 2:22, both phones connected to cell towers near the Youth Peace Center. As mentioned earlier, Montgomery Wilson and Pal pulled into the Youth Peace Center parking lot at 2:22 p.m. Wilson's phone remained at that location and was later recovered by law enforcement after the shooting. Pal's phone, however, was not abandoned. It continued moving and minutes after the shooting. After the shooting, Pal called Montgomery Wilson's phone, which he had left behind in the abandoned Chrysler. During the jail recording, Montgomery Wilson described pulling into the Youth Peace Center parking lot with Pal and waiting for Mack to come outside. He said, "I told Hyman Mike we pulled up. His homie was calling his phone. We pull up in the parking lot. They tell us, 'Man, there's an armed security guard,' and I'm cool. On Mike, I tell Marley, 'Bro, you ain't gotta do, just keep the security guard off us.' On my dead niece, you ain't got to do nothing. Just make sure the security guard stays in his place. Shorty, keep an eye on the security guard." We pulled up on Mike. We waited right there like 20 minutes. I'm on FaceTime video with Lil Fred, and the man keeps us on FaceTime. He wants to hear the shots. He wants to hear this because bro ain't even supposed to have made it that far. Only reason he made it that far, folks, I had a big ass gun and I really didn't want to be trying to shoot from a distance. I'm trying to really get on top of you. At this point, the confidential source interrupted Wilson, asking what kind of gun he used. Wilson replied that he used an ARP, an AR pistol. The following exchange took place. Montgomery Wilson: "Yeah, I had the standard fold with the 60 round and that on Mike. Let 3 shots out when he first came out." Marley: "Do me wait until he gets to his car. Now your ass tweaking by the time he gets to his car, that's enough time to get the pipe." Confidential source: scratch off anything. Montgomery Wilson: "Man, I will soon. As he makes it halfway out in between our car and his car, I bust doors down. He already was on the car when he first came out the door." Confidential source: "He was on y'all car." Montgomery Wilson: "He was on our car when he came out the door. He looked we behind tint, but the car is running. It's quiet though. It's a 300. I'm like, throw the door. Doom boom boom. I swing that towards the door. There's this dude, his little mentor dude that came out with him. I ain't even shoot at him. I just made him run back in. By this time, Marley tossing him down. Confidential source: the mentor dude. Montgomery Wilson: Huh? Confidential source: the mentor dude. Montgomery Wilson: No, he tossing him down, shorty. According to the document, video surveillance footage from the Youth Peace Center shows that as Mack walked across the parking lot, he looked over at the shooters in the Chrysler 300. Mack's mentor at the Youth Peace Center was standing by the door when the shooting began and ran back inside once shots were fired. Montgomery Wilson then described how he chased down and executed Mack. "I chased him on Mike. I chased him down, shorty. I braced up in the field, let off 4 or 5 shots. He never fell on Mike. He never fell. I'm like, I don't think I hit him. You get what I'm saying? He's steady running, though. You feel me? He hit, though. You can tell that he's hit due to the fact, shorty, you know. You gotta be losing breath. You get to slowing down. On Mike. He got distance on me. On Mike. I'm on his ass. He fell and he on Mike. He tried to go across the tracks. He fall. You know, 'cause he's scared. He fumbling and getting up. He finally get up. On Mike, he running. On my dead niece, last time I see that dude's face, his eyeballs was this. Big, I'm like, come here. He fall. You know you ain't getting back up after pow, 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 pow right over him. Pow, pow, headshot. Come here. I'm gone. Man, this next part is wild. It's section 3 titled Argument, and it basically lays out why the court should deny the defendant Powell's motion for severance. They're saying Powell's argument that Montgomery Wilson's statements to his cellmate shouldn't be used doesn't hold weight because those statements weren't testimonial, meaning they don't violate the Confrontation Clause of the Sixth Amendment. Instead, the government argues the statements are admissible against both defendants. Under Federal Rule of Evidence 804b-3, as statements against the declarant's own interest. They break this down further, explaining that the statements Montgomery made to the confidential source while in jail weren't testimonial, so the Confrontation Clause doesn't apply. Here's how they explain it. The Sixth Amendment's Confrontation Clause guarantees that, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to be confronted with the witnesses against him. They reference Crawford v. Washington, a key Supreme Court case, which ruled that testimonial statements from witnesses can't be admitted unless the witness is unavailable and the defendant had a prior opportunity to cross-examine them. But here's the catch. Only testimonial statements are covered by this rule. Testimonial means stuff like testimony at a prior trial or hearing, police interrogations, formal written statements like affidavits, declarations, or confessions, or statements made in situations where a reasonable person would expect them to be used in court. So basically, Montgomery Wilson didn't know he was being recorded by a confidential informant. Since he wasn't talking in an official capacity or expecting his words to be used in court, the government says his statements don't count as testimonial. They double down on this using case law from the Seventh Circuit, citing United States v. Penedetto. Powell had argued that because the conversation was set up by law enforcement, it should count as testimonial. But the court in that case said, it's not about what the informant knew, it's about what it looked like to the speaker. If the conversation looks like two co-conspirators casually talking, then it's not testimonial even if one of them is secretly an informant. The court ruled that because Montgomery didn't know he was talking to a CI and thought it was just a casual conversation, his statements don't violate the Confrontation Clause. Then they shift to the hearsay issue. Even if the Confrontation Clause doesn't apply, the statements still have to meet the requirements of the Federal Rules of Evidence. They explain that hearsay is generally not allowed in court because the speaker isn't under oath, the jury can't evaluate their credibility, and the defense doesn't get to cross-examine them. But there are exceptions to that rule. And one of the key exceptions is Rule 804b-3. Statements against interest if someone says something that would hurt themselves legally or criminally, and there's reason to believe the statement is trustworthy, it can be used, even if it's hearsay. Now this next part just adds more weight to the case. They're saying Montgomery Wilson's statements are admissible under Rule 804b-3 because they were against his own criminal interest. Here's how they explain that. Federal Rule of Evidence 804b-3 allows for the admission of hearsay if a reasonable person in the speaker's shoes wouldn't have said it unless they believed it to be true, and if what they said could hurt them, like exposing them to criminal liability, as long as there's other evidence that makes the statement trustworthy. In other words, if someone basically confesses to something that could get them locked up, and there's evidence to back it up, that statement can be used even if it's hearsay. They argue that Montgomery's statements are clearly against his interest. During the jail calls, he detailed his role in Mac's murder and didn't just incriminate himself. He also gave a lot of information tying Pal, aka Marley, to it too. Pal tried to argue that Montgomery was just talking tough, basically trying to sound like a shot caller in jail to build a reputation, form alliances, or avoid getting punked. But the feds counter that with case law, showing that even if a statement could be bravado, if it's backed by hard evidence, it still counts. They say the same applies here because Montgomery didn't just talk, he gave detailed play-by-play info about the murder, including specific references to Pal. And that's not just empty. Bragging his statements are backed by actual evidence. They even list examples side by side, showing what Montgomery said and how it was independently verified. Montgomery said, "But youngin' an older mother, so he was in a little program for the feds backed by evidence." Mac was enrolled in the Youth Peace Center, While on federal supervised release, Montgomery said, "They put Marley on point. I had just dropped Lil Fred off. Backed by evidence. Lil Fred's number was saved in Montgomery's. Phone confirmed by a Celebrite extraction report, Exhibit 11. Montgomery said, "Remind you probably 4 days ago, this the same car I used on dude at Johnson. I mean at Englewood on 63rd, right across from Murder's crib with the AR, backed by evidence." Around 5 days before Mac's murder, 2 masked men got out of a black Chrysler 300 same car, used in Mac's murder near Englewood and 63rd. So here's where it all really starts coming together. Montgomery Wilson made a statement like, "They call Marley. Marley got the inside source on unintelligible. I call Marley like, 'Where you at?' He said, 'I'm at the crib on 103rd. I said, 'On. Mike, I'ma grab you.'" And what do they have to back it up? Cell site records that show both their phones were pinging near Pal's house around 2:05 p.m., about 20 minutes before they pulled up to the Youth Peace Center. So again, his story lines up with the data. They're stacking example after example of how Montgomery's statements aren't just hearsay, they're backed by independent, verifiable evidence. This strengthens the government's position that his words are reliable and admissible under Rule 804(b)(3). They add even more evidence. Right before the shooting, Pal called Montgomery's phone, but he didn't answer. That same phone was later found abandoned in the Chrysler 300 with Montgomery's DNA on it, and a coffee cup with Pal's fingerprints. Montgomery had told the confidential informant that they killed Mac to get paid by Individual A, and that lines up with texts between Montgomery and Pal about collecting payment from someone identified only as F on the same day the murder took place, plus a Facebook story Montgomery posted showing off money while a song from Individual A played in the background. Here's the kicker. Montgomery Wilson made these statements before he was ever charged or had any access to discovery or official documents. That means he wasn't just echoing stuff he read in paperwork, he was telling the story from memory and it was accurate. They also shut down Pal's claim that Montgomery was trying to shift blame. In fact, Montgomery was bragging. He even downplayed Pal's role, calling him a flunky, saying he didn't need Pal for the high, they just told him to make sure the security guard didn't interfere. The quote they used, "You ain't gotta do nothing, just make sure the security guard ain't on us," kind of talk, combined with all the corroborating evidence, leads the government to say this. The content and context of Montgomery Wilson's statements, corroborated by a wealth of evidence, prove they are trustworthy under Rule 804(b)(3). Translation: there's no reason to grant Pal's request for severance. Final takeaway. This document is loaded with incriminating details, and it's painting a very clear picture of what allegedly went down. Even though they haven't named Individual A in the court filings, they've provided enough hints that it won't be hard for people following the case to connect the dots. One of the exhibits that talks about Individual A is sealed so we can't see it. For example, there's a Facebook video of Montgomery Wilson with money and a song by Individual A playing. I tried to check it, but it's also sealed. Everything related to Individual A is sealed. They have labeled Individual A as Lil Durk based on an affidavit from an investigator in 2023, which makes it seem like it's really Lil Durk. However, Lil Durk hasn't been charged in this case yet. We don't know if they're waiting to charge him after convicting these two guys, or if they're waiting for one of them to testify against Lil Durk. I don't know what's holding it up, but Lil Durk hasn't been charged yet. What's clear is that they think Lil Durk ordered the hit on Stefan Mac. They have text messages showing these guys asking about their payment after carrying out the hit. Easy, because even if Lil Durk wins his current federal case, he might still face similar charges in this case later on. This is pretty wild, because it looks like this situation is almost identical to the one the feds are accusing him of in the death of Lil Pab. It's the same method, the same approach. If true, it means Lil Durk has been doing this kind of thing for years. That's all we know for now. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Thanks for watching.